Sarah Snyder has been a writer and editor for 37 years and added life stories to her repertoire in 2018. She is the author of four books, including a memoir, Plant Tree, Carry Sheep, A Woman's Spiritual Journey Among the Sufis of Scotland, and a spin-off book, The Value of Your Soul, a collection of humorous personal stories from living in Scotland that use snippets of Rumi poetry to tease out lessons for coping with life balls. Sarah used to blog about retreating and self-care, and one day someone challenged her to put her knowledge into a book, which became DIY Solo Retreat, a handbook for creating your space, setting an intention, and getting the self-care you deserve, from which she also does workshops. Her very first book was a travel guide to her home state of Montana, and she's currently working on a novel series about a ranching family in Montana. And in today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, excitement, and joy to have on the show today with me, Sarah Snyder. How are you doing today, Sarah? Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I'm doing fantastic and I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, it's my joy, really, that we are sitting down across ocean to have a conversation around the value of your soul and your other body of amazing literature work. So I want to say thank you once again for joining me today. So Sarah, I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of what inspired you to write this book. But then I know you've been a writer for quite good numbers of years and you've written quite extensively in different parts. Now, I want to ask you particularly about the value of your soul, lessons in dealing with life annoyances, because I find the description of it to be quite amazing, interesting, compelling, and quite educative even in nature. And I would like you to tell us what inspired the making of it, what led you to take the journey, to start the journey of writing this book. If you can run us through the foundation, the making of this book, that would be great.
Sure. So it's a spin-off of my memoir,
Mm,
but I'll tell you my inspiration really comes from my sense of duty to share with others what I've learned about living life. And
mm.
most of what I learned, I have done the hard way because I'm stubborn. And sometimes I keep repeating and repeating my behavior and expecting different results, which, I do talk about in this book a little bit. So this book is a collection of 38 story lessons about how to cope when life throws you all different types of curveballs. And the lessons, like I had mentioned, are taken from my memoir of living in Scotland at a spiritual retreat center, which I did for 2 years. And
Mm.
I learned so much about myself during that time. I experienced the high of highs and the low of lows, and I want my legacy to be one of service. So,
Mm.
writing this book about my experiences and how I could have responded to situations differently for better outcomes is one way I hope I can help others on their journey, because covering this stony ground of life is a lot easier when someone who has already passed that way can share a little wisdom. So that's where my inspiration comes from.
I love I love the way you weave that statement. Following through this part is much fun when you have someone who has gone far ahead of you, holding your hand and pulling you to the right direction. That's a beautiful start towards getting that's an amazing one, basically. That's a very lovely one. And I want to move much further into your writing because your writing clearly reflects a strong personal faith. But the book itself doesn't feel overtly religious in some ways. Now, for readers who might not share your belief, or say, for instance, follow a spiritual path, what do you hope they will still connect with quite importantly in this book?
Yeah, it's true that I believe deeply in a supreme creator, what some people call God, other people call whatever they call it. But whether you even believe in a universal supreme being or not really doesn't
Mm,
matter, because these stories can speak to anyone who's ever experienced what I call teaching emotions of
mm,
expectation, disappointment, anger, fear, vulnerability, resentment, control, and impatience. So those are these bugaboos that I write about in this book, and everybody has experienced them. You're not human if you
Absolutely.
haven't.
Yes.
So you don't have to follow any particular religion to get something out of my book, because it's about these
Mm,
very real emotions, which have nothing to do with religion and everything to do with being humans ensnared
mm,
by our ego. So, I mean, even atheists can enjoy my book if they don't mind wading through the occasional references to God, because my spiritual beliefs, like everyone's else, are unique and personal. And I don't push my beliefs on anyone or think mine are even right. They're just right for me. So
mm.
I think there's something for everybody in this book, even if you don't have a spiritual faith.
Mm. Yeah, that's an amazing one, really, because I'm a huge fan of spirituality myself. I've written quite interestingly numbers of poetry that expound stylishly on those themes. And sometimes I get feedback, oh, yeah, it's not my cup of tea. I'm like, oh, of course, that's fine. But I would love to hear your feedback. I am much more interested, and I love it when I get feedback from people who do not entirely believe in what I've shared. I found their feedback to be so interesting. It may be a bit contracting. It may be a bit, off of what I intentionally wanted to convey, but I find their opinion to be quite interesting. And the fact that, I have a much blending team, which is pain and lamentation, which of course everybody has been through, just like you mentioned, teaching emotion, of expectation, of fear, of vulnerability and depression. Everybody has been through that, irrespective of your belief, irrespective of your cultural background, irrespective of your heritages or wherever you come from. It's this thing that defines us as human. Despite the fact that we are different in so many ways. So I love the fact that you
Yes.
mentioned that. Very important and quite interesting. And also following on your answer to that, I wanted to ask you, so much of your book reflects a journey of spiritual renewal and self-care. Now, how does living a spirit-centered life shape the way you see everyday challenges? I would love your answer to this.
Yeah. So for me personally, living a spirit-centered life has helped ground me in my dedication to being of service to humanity.
Hmm.
It makes me love people, which isn't always easy. And then it also helps inform my capacity for compassion and mercy, which is really required for
Absolutely.
a contented life on this earth.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so because of this, I see everyday challenges as just part of the human experience. So rather than feeling like a victim of circumstance when something unpleasant happens to me, I try to approach these situations as an opportunity to do something differently, to maybe believe something differently, look at something from a different lens, behave differently. And that doesn't mean that I don't sometimes get mired in anger or grief or
Hmm.
frustration because I'm
Right.
human,
Yeah,
but it just means
human.
that these
Hmm.
emotions can well up in me, right? But they're
Hmm.
short-lived for me because I know in the grander scheme, this is the universe's way of making me a better person and
Hmm.
helping me be more content.
I love that. That's a beautiful answer. That's an amazing one. I really love that. Thank you for this interesting, quite engaging, and deep reflective thought-provoking answers you've given to these lovely questions. Thank you very much. And I want
Thank
to
you.
go into the poetry section of your book, quite interestingly. Yeah, you weave in the poetry of Rumi. I think that's the right pronunciation of Rumi,
Rumi. Hmm.
perfectly, so beautifully throughout the book. For those who might not be familiar, how was Rumi and what drew you to his words instead of a more modern poet style? That's the first part of my question. And the second part is, how do you balance humility and humor while writing candidly about things that bothers you, especially when pairing them with deeply spiritual Rumi verses? I would love your
Right.
take on this.
Okay, so Rumi was a 13th century Persian poet. He was also an Islamic scholar and a Sufi
Mm,
mystic. And people
mm,
might know Sufis by the other name that they're called, which is whirling dervishes. And they're called this for the meditation practice, which involves them spinning around in circles, and they're dressed in these long flowing robes. And I chose to apply what Rumi had to say about the meaning of life in poetry for two reasons, really. The
Mm.
first is I am a huge fan of his love poems to God. He is
Wow.
my go-to when I need a reminder that we are just beings manifested by the Almighty. We're born of love. We're spirits living a human life. And his
Mm.
poems and fables deal with life's annoyances and the distractions that people throughout the ages have wrestled with. He knew what it meant to love and also how hard it is for us mere mortals to love. So I
Mm.
find his words inspirational because he also struggled with the same things that we do, yet he came out on the other side and wrote these beautiful love poems.
Mm.
And he also had a sense of humor. And the second
Mm.
reason I chose Rumi is because his poetry, though deeply rooted in the struggles of his time, which is the 13th century, like I mentioned, they're in fact timeless because we still
Mm.
struggle as humans with the same basic things people have always struggled with, the
Absolutely.
fear, the temptation, the anxiety, the
Yeah.
the expectation, all that. So I wanted to introduce Rumi to people who might not be familiar with his work. And a
Mm.
lot of his writing really makes you think. To address your question about balancing humility and humor when I'm writing candidly about things that bother me,
Mm.
I think that I talked about being in service. So, being in service to others through telling my personal stories requires being candid. I mean,
Yeah.
people appreciate seeing the struggles that others go through and how others fell and then got back up again. And
Mm.
it gives them hope because they see, oh, this person did it. There's no reason
Yeah.
why I can't. And it makes us feel heard when we hear other people's stories that are similar to ours. And it makes us feel like we belong because we all do belong.
Mm.
And so this is really important when you're trying to appeal to an audience who struggles with the same things that you might struggle with. So you
Mm.
have to spend some of your words being honest and candid, and then you really have to
Absolutely.
sprinkle in a little humility where appropriate. And
Mm.
so I use self-deprecating humor also because this goes a long way to easing stress and tension. Like if you can't laugh at yourself, then
Mm.
you got a problem, really. So I think using humor is really a great way to cope when life just opens its junk box and dumps it on you. So,
Mm.
when you're sitting in the middle of that junk pile, it doesn't seem so funny at the time. But these
Mm.
days, when I'm sitting there, I often think, well, someday this is going to make a great story and make people laugh.
Mm.
And because I'm also a live storyteller, I do tell stories live on the stage about personal experiences. I'm
Interesting.
always open to experiences because someday they're going to make a great story that I'm going to also be able to tell on the stage and make people
Absolutely.
laugh.
Oh, wow. That's a very interesting, quite beautiful approach to storytelling that you've got in there. And if you have a copy of The Value of Your Soul, I'd like you to show it to the camera just so we can
Okay,
see what it looks like.
let
Yeah.
me turn off my blur background
And that's a
there.
beautiful cover, really.
Yeah.
Mm.
A friend of mine who is an artist, he did the drawing, and this, of course, is me with life's junk pile. And then each chapter
Wow.
opens with an
Illustration.
illustration too
Interesting.
that illustrates what the little story is about. So that's really fun. And I had a really good time working
Wow.
with him to come up with those illustrations.
That's an amazing one as well. I like the fact that those illustrations are there. I love books of that category, of that type. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. Now, your writing has been described as both witty and deeply insightful. What is your creative process like? How do you tend to write in a moment as things happen? Or, what I said, do you tend to write in the moment as things happen? Or do your stories just, usually come from looking back with a fresh perspective? Or they just come randomly? Tell us, how did they happen? Where did those words come from? Because it's something that so much intrigued me about storytelling. And I often wonders how writers pull these words together in a way that they go on smoothly, quite beautifully, and create a long-lasting image in the reader's mind, forcing them to think long and long as they keep reading. What's the creative process like? I'd like to know.
Yeah. It's so my creative process is very organic. And I see myself as a conduit for stories.
Wow.
Like stories are given to me. They may be my experience, but the story themselves are given to me to tell. And the
Mm,
experiences that I talk about in this book, as I mentioned, come directly from my memoir. And those experiences I was actually writing about at the time. I was journaling and I was writing long letters home to my family because I was living overseas in Scotland and my family was back in America. And
yeah.
I thought these guys, these stories are so unique and they're so wild and some crazy things happened and they were
Mm,
sometimes unreal. I had to let my people know what was happening to me
yeah.
while it was happening. And I also knew they'd get a kick out of it. But when I actually sat down to write my memoir, which was the precursor to this book, it
Yeah.
took me nearly 20 years to complete. So that time period between my experience of, what I actually happened to me and the publication of this book also gave me the time to reflect on and offer greater insight to
Mm,
readers about my state of mind at the time and
mm,
compare it with how it affected me much later in life. So I was able to look back and say, this is what happened. This is how I responded. But you know what? This would have been a much better way to respond. I didn't know it at the time. So, although I write in the moment, especially when I'm experiencing things that
mm,
are new and they can compel me to explore in my writing, I also like to write about events that, well, at the time I might not have thought profound, but many years later become profound upon reflection, and
mm.
therefore they deserve to be written about. Again, like I said, the stories just come to me, and the universe just says, Sarah, you got to write about this. So I do.
Wow. Wow. That's another beautiful answer to that. Quite impressively, how these things, because I think that's one of the things I found writing to be quite interesting. How these words just come to you, whispers to your ear like a spirit, or whispers to your hair like an unseen little child. And so, like, pick up your pen, it's high time, let's do something. And it just keep flowing, keep flowing. It's a beautiful skill. More reason why I feel writers need to be praised more for their work. That's an
Yes.
amazing answer you provided. Thank you. Quite amazingly. I'm taking note on my end here too. If you see my hands shaking.
That's good.
I'd also like to ask you, because you often write about the intersection of everyday life and deeper meaning. Quite close to philosophy in some ways. Now, do you find that wisdom often show up in the mundane, in the most unexpected ways? And how do you decide which life experience are book worthy, quote unquote, or do you let the moment choose for you? Because I feel there's some I would like to, oh, this is amazing. There's some I thought of and said, oh, I would love to tell this person's story and add a bit of fiction to it. Something I'm currently working on. That's an interesting question. How do you decide which life experiences are book worthy and the ones you feel like, oh no, I don't think this will be much interesting?
Yeah, that's a good question. And like I said, as a conduit, I often get the message that says you need to do this. Whether I share that with the world is I may or may not share that with the world, but for some reason I
Mm,
need to write it at least for myself.
yeah.
But you asked about wisdom showing up in the mundane, and I
Mm,
think wisdom shows up when we're listening for it. And in
mm,
order to listen for it, you have to quiet the mind. And I say to people at least 10 minutes at some point in your day, turn off the radio, turn off the
mm.
audiobook, turn off the television, turn off the
That's
noise,
right.
whatever that noise
Social
is,
media.
including the noise in your head, the constant
Mm,
chatter, and
mm,
just be quiet and
honestly.
observe and listen without judgment or
Mm,
commentary or opinion. Like you do not have to have an opinion on everything. Like a lot of us think
mm,
we have to have an opinion on it. We don't.
mm,
So, for example, when you're doing a mundane task, say of washing dishes, I pick that because it's something I actually really enjoy doing.
mm,
Um, Concentrate on the feel of the sponge in your hand or maybe
Wow.
the texture of the dishes and
Mm,
the suds and your hands immersed in the suds and the water. And don't be thinking about the next task that you've got to do, or that next phone call you need to make, or that person who made you angry earlier that day. And you might be surprised by a little wisdom coming through, or
mm,
simply be surprised by how relaxed you are in that moment, simply because you aren't bothered by anything else.
mm,
That is wisdom.
mm.
And the more you practice the
Wow.
stillness, the more the wisdom comes through. And the best time to practice it is when you're doing a mundane task that does not require brain power, right?
Mm,
So, you asked about how you decide which life experiences are book worthy. Again, like I said, sometimes, the universe just says write about it. But
mm,
anything I find book worthy really just plants itself in my mind. Or
mm.
sometimes it says, it taps me on the shoulder and it says, excuse me, story material here. So it all comes down to what I'm inspired to write rather than me sitting down to think, what should I write about? So I really honestly believe that the stories choose me
Mm,
rather than the other way around.
mm. You feel like it just come to you and say, "Excuse me, Sarah. I have something for you. Could you pick your pen and let's get it on going?" It's an amazing. I love
Yep.
what you said about the stillness.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like you being still, stillness amidst the dire chaos ongoing in the world, not thinking of who offended you earlier, maybe at work or anywhere, not thinking of the next phone call to make. Just sitting down there, immersing yourself in the moment and observing the stillness. It's a lot of wisdom in there. That's an amazing one. I can relate to it. But sometimes one of the issues I found so much to be quite distracting for me is social media. I understand the fact that I'm a social media person, but
Yeah,
sometimes I feel I just want to go off of these social media spaces. I don't want to have my internet devices turned on. I want to just, be without it for like, even if it's 5 or 6, 7 hours, you would love yourself. You would appreciate the outcome because these things are so distracting in nature. Before you know what is happening, the time is far
they are.
past. Asking yourself, what have I done today? Oh, goodness, it's an amazing one. I love your take on that. Stillness, beautiful stillness. I'm learning quite a lot, taking quite a lot of notes in here. Thank you very much, sir. This is
That's
really
always good.
impressive. Very impressive. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And now, apart
Yeah.
from the value of your soul, do you have any other works that you've authored or say currently working on?
Well, as you mentioned, so my very first book back in 1995 was a travel guide to Montana, where I lived at the
Wow.
time. It's now at its fourth edition. And I
Wow.
love that book because it's just me going out on the road and writing about scenic drives in Montana and things you can see and do in the history. So if anybody's traveling to Montana, I would recommend that book. But in 2019, so then I published a series of three books, like one after the other, 2019, 2020, and 2021. The 2019 was my memoir about living in Scotland at that spiritual retreat center. And
Mm,
that's called Plant Trees Carry Sheep. And that's kind of a play on words from an old Buddhist saying that's, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood,
mm,
carry water. And it speaks to, you know what, whether you're enlightened or not, you still have to attend to the mundane tasks of being human in this world, going back
mm.
to the mundane tasks. So that's what that book was very much about.
Wow.
So I liked the play on words. And then in my book that we're talking about now, The Value of Your Soul, it's a spinoff of the memoir. And so that's the stories taken from my memoir and the lessons learned with the Rumi poetry in. And then I
Mm.
published a short book in 2021 titled DIY Solo Retreats. And
Oh.
that's about how to organize a mini retreat for yourself. Talk about getting time for self-care and stillness and listening to wisdom.
Mm,
Either retreating yourself for a minimum of like a 2 hour session or doing it in a small group without having to go away on a retreat to a retreat center because some people can't afford that.
mm,
And it's not just the money, it's the time, right? And it's the scariness about it. So that book includes how to set an intention and how to create your sacred space. And
Wow.
I have a few current projects. One of them is a fictional. I'm getting into fiction now. Those are all those
Interesting.
four books I've published so far is
Wow.
nonfiction. But now I'm getting into fiction, pretty much just straight up commercial fiction.
Mm,
And one of the books I'm writing is going to be a series, and it's a family saga that takes place mostly on a ranch in Montana. And I'm
oh,
very passionate about that. I've written actually a pilot script for a television
interesting.
series in case I want to market it at that. And I actually have pitched it to Hollywood and I got a few bites, but I decided I'm going to write the book first and get some traction with the book.
Mm. That sounds like an amazing project you've got ongoing. I hope that goes on successfully. That's a beautiful one from the
Thank you.
little one you've shared so far. Quite exciting to know. Thank you. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you, as a published author, what sort of advice would you give other writers who are still struggling with writing and publishing a book? Take, for instance, those who are stuck on the way with one or two things. What would you advise people in this category? And also, just in case we have some viewers who are watching this interview and would love to get a copy of your book, what platform is it available on for purchase?
Sure, sure. So, my first book was published by a traditional publisher. They actually approached me to write it, and they own the
Wow.
copyright. But then the other three that I was talking about, I self-published. Um, I do prefer self-publishing, and I would recommend it to people who are having a hard time maybe finding an agent or finding a publisher, because
Mm,
the reason why I like it is because it gives me the artistic freedom to do what I want to do with my own work. But
mm,
the advice I would give other writers is, you really have to be prepared to spend money on a book designer
yeah,
and a good editor. You
yeah.
can tackle those things by yourself, but I don't really recommend, I highly do not recommend editing your own
Mm,
work because I'm an editor by profession as well. I do not edit my own writing. I can proofread it, but I can't edit it. Um, and I recommend that you don't design your book by yourself either, because I've seen some people just say, well, I want to save the money and design it myself. And it,
mm.
a badly designed book does not sell well. And there are
Right.
some
Yeah.
amazing book designers out there that are really not that expensive. I've used the same one for the three books that I've self-published. She's awesome. She also knows how to give you the files to upload
Mm,
to the KDP platform, which is the Amazon self-publishing. Um, so I have to say, though, one of the biggest challenges that I've had is finding a good content editor. The good ones are
mm,
very expensive. Now they are totally worth their price, but it's just finding one that has the time and being able to afford them. And I think another
mm.
challenge, and advice I'd give to people is marketing. When you self-publish, you have to do the marketing
Yeah.
on your own. And even if you're with a traditional publisher, unless you're an A-list author, you still are
Mm.
expected to do a lot of the marketing. So you have
Absolutely.
to lay the groundwork for that by
Mm,
doing a lot of pre-launch marketing.
mm,
And it's a full-time job, which is difficult for me because I also have a full-time job. Plus,
mm.
I have a couple other businesses going on the side, including my writing. So, but I really encourage other writers to find a good designer, find a good editor, spend the money. If you don't have it, start a Kickstarter campaign. I know plenty
Mm.
of writers who have had a Kickstarter campaign and they've raised the money to hire an editor. In
Yeah.
fact, one of my writer friends does this for every book. She's on book number 3 now. And
Mm,
so yeah, I really it's very much worth getting a quality editor and a quality designer. And again, they're not that expensive. Quality art for your cover, which also is not very expensive. And that's the way to do it. Now, where can readers get a copy of my book? My books are all available either on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble online, bookshop.org, which I really like because a percentage of your fee for the book goes to support nonprofits. And you can also order any of my books from any brick and mortar store.
mm,
You They don't tend to carry it on the shelves any of my books on the shelves because they're not big sellers, right? But you can have them order for you if you have a local bookstore you like to support. And then readers can also buy signed copies directly from me by contacting me through my website, which you can post on this podcast, which
Absolutely.
is lunarivervoices.com. So Luna as in moon, river as in the flowing body of water,
Mm.
voices.com. And you can find links to my books on these on-tail retail sites that I just mentioned on my website.
Absolutely. That's an amazing advice you've got, really, and I'm hoping that viewers, even including myself, would love to utilize it. And also, I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Sarah's book directly on Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, on our website, and also on other platforms. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me today in conversation around your amazing body of literature work. And also, this is so exciting, very instructive, quite educative, entertaining, compelling, and awesome. I learned a lot, really. And I must say thank you very much for sitting down with me in conversation around your titles. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Peter. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, really.